Hello and welcome to today's session of Culture Beyond COVID. I'm very happy to announce today's guest, which is Sylvia Amann from Austria, and she is what we can call an expert in the field of EU cultural policies and international cultural cooperation. Amongst others, she is member of the Selection and Monitoring Board for the European Capitals of Culture, and today she will highlight how COVID-19 is not only calling for new strategic approaches for the cultural and creative sector, but how it is also accelerating international cultural cooperation. So, dear Sylvia Amann, the floor is yours.
My name is Sylvia Amann, and my background is in cultural and creative industry for more than 20 years when I founded my small company called InfoRelay. And this work in InfoRelay has quite a lot developed. So first, we were mainly focusing on how to better use EU programs for culture and for the creative sector. But more and more with this experience, cultural policy developments became more relevant for us. And now we are mainly working in advising and consulting cultural policy developments. This depends quite a lot on the different working strengths I'm having. So related to the mentioned cultural policy activities, this was pretty much, how could I say, yes, enforced or even become more stressful than it was already, because in this current situation, we need to find urgently and rapidly new solutions, new policy approaches, new support measures. And so I'm working quite on different studies and strategies, which all have very pressing deadlines. And so I'm more faced with an urgent need of answers from policymakers. In other areas, I have experienced different kind of effects of this COVID-19 crisis. So I'm also a member of the Selection and Monitoring Panel of the European Capitals of Culture. So this is something which is much more related to cultural and artistic events, programs, and as we have all experienced, this was extremely difficult here and still is for the cultural sector to perform. So we have experienced also very difficult times in the ongoing European Capitals of Culture in the year 2020, which need to reshuffle, reprogram, reorganize themselves in the spring. And then in addition, of course, we were also faced during monitoring activities with kind of very difficult situations in European capitals of culture for the upcoming years, because also this needed to be changed quite considerably. And then, of course, we are now in the context of a German initiative and also in the context of the German EU presidency. We had also the first ever complete online and digital selection process for a European capital of culture. So this is all at the same time learning for us, but also cities and cultural stakeholders, artists, cultural operators, technicians had to learn very rapidly to adapt to the new situation in order to make this happen. And then maybe to highlight another element, I'm also quite engaged in international cooperation, especially also with Africa, but also with Asia. They are mainly with South Korea. And after maybe a first kind of breathtaking after the shock of the pandemic and the first lockdown, but afterwards it became obvious that this international cooperation can be maybe better accelerated even in this situation in which we are right now. So I accelerated a lot my exchanges with the African continents, also meetings and workshops which were planned originally to take place maybe for a smaller group of participants became much bigger and the exchange could be widened. So this challenge remains how to further work on that. But at least for 2020, I would rather say that this is something which I would say is maybe a new way of doing, which provides us also with new opportunities and also with further involvement. And by that means also better access to international exchange for much more people. Like just before, an opportunity. But compared to the challenges we are currently facing, it's really a very difficult time for the cultural and creative sector. And it became obvious where are the shortcomings. It became extremely visible. And I think we must really focus on these shortcomings now in the short and midterm. And I understand that a lot of emergency activities have been launched, but on the other hand, there are structural problems. And we see, for example, a big structural problem that we are not having real social protection for larger parts of the CCS. We see that the freelancers, the technicians, the artists, they depend now completely on emergency support, but they have no right. It's not like an employee who loses its job and then finally gets an unemployment support and has a legal right to do so and to go to the labor office or however it is called in the different countries and can say, okay, I've lost my job and now I get a certain percentage of my income. This is not the case for artists and creative entrepreneurs. And so I think this is, for example, a very urgent element of a structural deficit in the cultural sector, which needs to be addressed. Yeah. Then there is a second one, because we are here also in the context of a new presidency initiative with this series of interviews, if I understood right. So all this has also a European dimension. And I must say I was deeply shocked during early summer and spring when one of the first reactions of the European countries was to close borders. It's one of the big achievements from Europe that we didn't have these borders anymore. And when there is a virus everywhere, also the experts told us that closing borders does not really help. And in some countries, it were even a kind of trend to internal borders. So it was really a very strange answer. And I think there is also a crucial role for culture inside the EU, but also in the international context to, I take now rather a strong word, really to fight for open borders, for cooperation, for exchange, for also keeping these spaces of interaction, be it in the digital or in the analog world. So to ensure that there is a public debate, to ensure that cultural expressions are heard, to ensure that creativity can take place in cooperation, because most of our cultural sector is international. It's very small parts which are only related to a specific location or which are very local. Most of our cultural and creative activities are interlinked, are done by people from different countries. Together they are doing co-production, they are playing theater together, they are doing music together. So it's all international or Europe-wide. So in that sense, it's really crucial. And this is maybe the societal dimension in all that, the cultural dimension, but all this has also economic dimension, because we must also understand when we close the borders or when we make border crossings more difficult, that people still cannot provide their services in another country. Because when I would have a contract as technician somewhere in another EU country, but I have to go to 14 days of quarantine, and then back home again to 14 days to quarantine, you will never get such a payment for a contract in order to be able to do so. So in a way, an already fragilized sector is getting more fragile by these measures, and it does a lot of harm to Europe in general, to competitiveness, to societies, to cultural cooperation, and it feeds in worst case nationalism and populism, because at the very end these kind of measures have a second message. It means all the bad is coming from the other side of the border, be it the virus or maybe also something else. And this is really something I feel very, very pity, and I hope that we will soon come back to the spirit of broad European cooperation, and maybe that member states, I think they are mainly responsible, have the competences in these areas, come back to cooperation, to open borders, to try to solve these problems together. Yeah.
Thank you for this very concise summary and for raising extremely fundamental aspects. Closed borders have indeed been a huge obstacle for European cooperation and have demonstrated once again how crucial it is to keep advocating for our common rights. This aspect is, amongst others, also at the heart of the EU program called Rights and Values, which from 2021 onwards will unite several former EU funding programs under one umbrella. In the next session, we will explore how cultural projects are facilitated under this new program, as well as in the framework of Erasmus+, the EU's large funding program for education. So I hope to see you next week. Bye bye.